Hello, I'm Howard. I've worked in UK railway engineering for nearly 20 years in everything from maintenance, renewals, and fault response to project work, design work, and management. I wanted to talk today about Hogwarts Legacy. My missus introduced me to this game, which she's been playing, and I saw that it had a railway in it and a train and thought, here's an opportunity to do another video. So, what I do in these railway gaming reviews is just look at the railways in video games and see how accurate they are, what the developers did right, what they did wrong, and what they could have done better, and the realism of it. I know that it's not always going to be realistic or not always intended to be, but it's just interesting, and I can talk about some of the genuine aspects of railway engineering and the process. And here we are at Hogsmeade Station, a typical sort of Victorian British railway station. A couple of platforms, one on each side. You can see these platforms, they're straight up and down, a straight edge. That's fallen out of fashion these days, although they did build it like that in the Victorian days. Nowadays, the wall would be set back from the track and that there'd be an overhang. So the platform top would overhang the wall for two reasons. Number one, for safety, so that if anyone did was stuck in the platform or fall down between it, they've got somewhere to roll into to escape the train. And also these days, there's a lot of cabling and ducting. Nice that they've added detail of paint splashed on the wall there, where they've painted the white stripe on the edge. And they've gone for here, quite rightly, the classic wooden sleepers and flat bottom rail design. This is very common sort of Victorian stuff. Wooden sleepers, obviously, and then you have the rail sits inside a base plate. This is flat bottom rail, and then that base plate is screwed down into the wooden sleeper, as you can see there with the screw heads sticking out of the base plate. And this is a fish plate or a joint bar, it's sometimes called, rail joint, where there's four bolt holes there joining two lengths of rail, two in each side of the joint of the length of rail. Very common. That's what's responsible for the sort of clickety clack noise of the railway as the train wheels pass over the joints that are every 60 foot. They were in Victorian engineering. Instead of what these days it's welded and it just sort of makes a whistle. It's not quite as entertaining. But here we see an issue that raises its head throughout the rest of this game: ballast. In the station here, you've got a bit of ballast and some rocks and shale and stuff. Nowhere else is this present. You can see here all the bays are empty of ballast. This becomes a problem at any amount of speed, really. Ballast, you need it for stability. It resists lateral movement. So if a train, you see, these sleepers appear to be just sat in actually into the into the brickwork. Maybe they've carved channels for each of them, but I find that unlikely. It's probably just the modelling. If that was actually sat on top of this bridge, on top of these cobblestones, especially if it just got a bit wet and moss, when the train comes down or up that gradient that we see ahead of us there, it would shift the track right over. It would just slide everywhere on these cobblestones, and it'd just be moving all over the place. It'd be misaligned. It'd probably break a few of the joints, depending on the speed. It's not good to not have ballast or have bad ballast because, like I say, it's responsible for resisting lateral movement as the train goes round a curve. It also helps with drainage. So water around here will pool quite easily and get above the water and get above the railhead. Vegetation control. So you don't want too much vegetation growing out like trees and large amounts of plants growing out of your ballast like they are in the mud here, but they're only small. It does other things like vibration dampening to make the ride a bit smoother, and ultimately ballast is also responsible for load transfer, to transfer the load from underneath the rails and spread it out over a wider area, so there's not so much impact on the components from the train. There's a joint there, but it's not got a joint bar on it. This is clearly just part of the modelling, where you can see there's the sort of corners in the curve. This does happen in real life when you've got either shorter rail sections or it's a really tight radius. Usually sections are about 60 foot, so the effect isn't this pronounced. But there you go. There's some joints there. And here comes the Hogwarts Express rolling through Hogsmeade Station. straight over that bridge that we were just looking at, where there's no ballast around the sleepers. You can see how that resting on just gently on top of some cobblestones might be misaligned by something moving at that speed around a curve. Ballast, you might say, maybe Hogwarts is too old for that, but the earliest reference I could find to ballast was in about 1840, and there was a standard that I saw for recommendations on how much ballast to use, published in about 1897. So it's definitely Victorian era stuff, which is suitable for the time. It was probably just a bit difficult to model and think, why would they put it in? And then you can always write anything off in Hogwarts and the Wizarding World as magic, I suppose. We've got a bit of a foot crossing here. This sort of design, without the stones clipping through the top, this sort of design is still used to this day. There's plenty of foot crossings around some of the more rural lines that are just wood, exactly like this. Nowadays, the standard is to put some little blue lights on them so that you can still see where it is in the dark and you don't walk off the end and trip. So there'd be rows of little blue lights on them now. Here, I'm not so sure why the track is so far over to one side on this bridge. It doesn't really serve any real purpose, although it would be nice for the maintenance guys and the track workers to be able to walk down the side of it and have that easy patrol route, easy access to everything that you need. The bridge itself is a magnificent and very scenic, sort of British Victorian era brick bridge, similar to, say, Ribble Head Viaduct or maybe Ford Valley Viaduct in Kent. Very similar structure, very typical columns and piers, and the archways on the top. The only minor complaint I have about this bridge is that the columns or piers, as they're sometimes called, don't. Apart from that one, don't really go into a foundation. You see on these ones, they've sort of built the bridge and then wrapped the rock around it, rather than carving the rock away to make some kind of abutment or foundation. They've sort of plonked the bridge there and then built the rock up around it, which is just how it's designed. But it still looks really great from a distance, and when you're flying around on your broom, generally no complaints. It's an otherwise really good structure, useful. They've done the homework a bit, and they've seen these recesses, which in the olden days this was for track workers to hide in. Basically, when there was a train coming, they have these in tunnels. Plenty of these in old Victorian tunnels and over viaducts and bridges for the track workers to stand out, stand in a position of safety while the train passes. They just see it coming and go and hide in the recess. Another very similar viaduct here. Looks like the same model. They've just copied that over and plonked it there to cross that portion. There are some smaller bridges up here that we'll take a look at. And here's another repeat of the same bridge model. This time, though, they've put the track in the middle of the bridge rather than over to one side. Now, here's a bit of a smaller bridge. This is just a simple girder and wooden slack construction sort of bridge. And the wood's very realistic there, apart from it clipping through the metal. That's a really good modelling of the wood. I don't see quite how it's attached onto the steel girder of the bridge, because you've got the steel girder and then the wood doesn't appear to be bolted down or anything. It just appears to have been sunk into it. Here's some sheep under the bridge. This one's slightly different. Let's levitate a sheep. I like doing that when I'm out and about. IRL. Okay, so this one's slightly different. You can see the underneath. They've used the same sort of iron or steel girder structure with wooden planks over the top, and this one's got a bit more support with these timber supports that are driven into the ground. No harm in that. That structure certainly looks like it could take the weight of the Hogwarts Express. I've no difficulty believing that. That's a sensible length to have an unsupported section. Considering the supports either side, that's a believable design. What I like is that this implies that there's a Hogwarts School of Infrastructure Maintenance, because all this stuff needs maintaining, especially with the no ballast. The components are going to take a real kick in. The sleepers are going to split sooner than they would without ballast. The base plates are going to crack. You might get a few broken rails. So someone's got to be maintaining all this. Maybe some sort of groundskeeper or a team of minotaurs or something. But yeah, so the railway requires a lot of maintenance. So someone's looking after this. Maybe you get teams of wizarding track patrolmen who just simply can flick the wrist and say reparo. Wouldn't that be good? Here we go, a tunnel entrance. Yes, beware spiders, the sign says there. That's good advice in tunnels like this. I've been in many tunnels in the middle of the night with spiders crawling around everywhere, especially near the tunnel mouths, where there's a lot of midges sometimes as well, because they like that shade. In the summertime, these places get full of midges and spiders and various insects. No wizards, no magic. I guess magical maintenance of this tunnel is forbidden. Now, one thing this game doesn't have is a signalling system, which is okay and reasonable. So, normally at a station, maybe like Hogsmeade, you'd expect a signal at either end, a home signal, to say it's okay for the train to leave the station or to stop at the station, and that would be normally in the Victorian era controlled by a signal box or perhaps a station master. And in this game there aren't any, which is believable because the only train that comes through here is the Hogwarts Express. Now, the purpose of the signalling system is to keep trains apart from each other and stop them crashing into each other, in essence. So it divides the railway up into block sections controlled by signals. So it's like enter this section or do not enter this section, based on whether or not there's a train in the immediate area. So if there was a train in the next section along, you wouldn't want another train to go in there because it would crash into the back of it. But because there's only the Hogwarts Express that services this station, there really is no need for a signalling system. Any track circuits, it gives me a lot less to talk about in the video compared to some of the other games that had loads of signalling in them. But yeah, not required for this railway. So the railway in this game stops at Hogsmeade Station only, and it cuts through the valley from tunnel entrance to tunnel entrance. And as the crow flies, I placed markers, not visible in this shot, but I placed markers on either end and calculated the distance as the crow flies for this length of railway. The entire lot to be about 2,200 meters, so about a mile and a half as the crow flies, but as it sweeps and bends around, perhaps about 2 mile, which is okay. There's some maintenance guys here wandering around the bridge. Good work, lads. But all in all, this railway, it's not bad. It's just the lack of ballast that gets me really. But then again, rendering tens of millions of rocks would have probably made it look worse and slowed up the frame rate. It's just an extra thing that's really unnecessary because only only railway sort of nerds are going to notice that anyway. But overall, there's not much to review in this game. It's literally um, the two rails, sleepers, and some fastenings, apart from the bridges, which, as I've said before, are really good representations of what they should be. That is Victorian era railway bridges, brick built. It's exactly the right sort of era. It's what it's aiming to be. So all in all, there's just not much for me to review. So it can have a 5 out of 10. They've made some effort, made a sensible railway line. There's no crazy curve radiuses or crazy inclines going up or going down, which sometimes games get wrong. You think trains just have infinite traction, but no, this is a sensible route for the train to take. They've routed it well. The structures are believable. So yeah, not too bad of an effort. They could have really um, they could have really spit shined it and made it really good, but that probably would have taken a bit more input and a bit more time than was necessary for for how much use it gets in the games. So some games are quite railway heavy, like Metro Exodus, where that was really worth building the railway to quite realistic standards because it's a large part of the plot. But how much of the Harry Potter plot is central to the railway? Really, not a lot. So yeah, appropriate for the game. Pretty good. Not bad. Could have been better. Thanks for tuning in.